we will do everything but F1. We've seen that everybody attacks the lowest hanging fruit, which is Formula 1. Because it's the easiest thing to do. If you keep doing the easy things, you're not really moving the needle anywhere. So we said we will do everything but F1. Where's the farthest we've gone? I think we've covered the Oceania championships that happen in New Zealand, the championships that happen in Japan, the local championships in Japan. So F4 Japanese, Super Formula Lights. We do the Chinese races as much as possible because people don't know this, but the Chinese market for motorsports is massive.
What else does Hairpin Media do? Or anyone who wants to get in touch with Hairpin Media? How can they?
One is through content. Most of our followers, like all the people that follow our content, these are not casual fans of sport. They want to know more, they want to dig deep. The second is the watch parties. Actually, we very intentionally did it in a coffee shop because I think they invite a lot of casual fans and you lose connection with each other when there's so much of loud noise around you and so many people all just crammed in like one place.
Welcome back to another episode of The Sandbox Show. Today we have with us Ananya Srinidhi. She is super passionate about motorsports and she's solving for content, branding and so much more in the space. She's the co-founder of Hairpin.co, who is focusing on Asian motorsports. We'll just dive into the conversation, dive deep. So Ananya, let's start from what makes motorsports so interesting for you?
Oh wow, it's a loaded question. I have to tell you that. I think
when I was seeing your profile, actually, I did see you started blogging about motorsports right from 2011.
Yeah.
So you've been here a long time.
I've been a fan for a long time. Only because I thought that the people that drive these machines, that operate these machines, are basically not human. Mm-hmm. Like they are a step above being human, and for me it's all about like exploring what human limit and human potential really is. Mm-hmm. And if you think that human potential is, let's say, running a marathon in 2 hours plus, and if somebody can change your mind by saying I can do it in under something else, like lesser than what is conventionally known, then that fascinates me. Mm-hmm. So I think racing drivers are a very interesting creature. They're not human because you and I are human. Following a diet, maintaining certain goals are human. But these guys are operating machines that basically defy laws of physics. Mm-hmm. They are, and to be able to wield it, to perform at that level, mm-hmm. while maintaining mental health and staying sane and between all of it is insane. Like, and that sort of insanity is what captured me first.
Okay.
And my entry into the sport was because my dad was talking about, hey, you have to look at this chap, young Lewis Hamilton, in like GP3 or GP2 or whatever.
LH
coming
fans.
Up. Yeah. It's coming up the ranks. You have to keep track of his progress. And so I was like, okay, interesting. So I took his word for it.
Okay.
And that's 2008 was my first season. But we've been fans. Dad has been a fan of the sport for a long time. So we used to sit and read like Michael Schumacher, newspaper cuttings and all of that. So yeah, it's been a conversation in the house, but got really serious only 2008, 7-8ish.
Do you want to touch a little bit upon your journey when you started out in 2008? How did it start? How did it progress into somewhat of a sneak peek for someone who's interested in motorsports to understand what it actually feels like? All we hear is LH stories, Schumacher stories, or someone who's made it big. For someone who's around us, gotten into it, taken a jab at it, what is your take on it?
How I got into it is like anybody else today, right? I was a fan of the sport. I had opinions that I wanted to like scream out, but nobody was listening because the sport was not popular back then. So I started writing about it. Mm-hmm. The more you write about it, the more the sport also grows, because it's around when I started writing about Formula 1, I was one of the very few that were already doing it. And then the GP came to the country, which was just very opportune in that sense, because that sort of kickstarted the whole ecosystem as we know it today. So a lot of online sources like blogs, newspapers, magazines started covering it. So that was my gateway into these kind of portals.
Interesting.
So I used to write small opinion pieces for a magazine. Then I got into the Sportskeeda ecosystem. So I did like a very short summer journalism course with them, and I'm still in touch with my editor. So it was like it was like the universe is kind of putting together opportunities for me to grow in the sport further. So like any fan, I watched the sport, I wrote about it, and college, school, everything took over. And then I was starting like these small projects in racing. So I was like the first one girl in amongst 80 guys on a grid. So I was like, okay, fine, we should get more women into this.
Yeah.
This is crazy. Like, how can I be the only one? So we would organize small events that got more, women into the sport. I'm a serial project starter is what I would call myself. Not a founder, entrepreneur, nothing like that. Just somebody that wanted to experiment different things. So all those sort of experiments led me to meeting interesting people, the right people, I would say. And then it became a question of, okay, when is the right time to jump into this?
Okay.
And that sort of right time came about in, say, 2022, 3-ish. The sport had become very popular because of Drive to Survive, all of that. Then India also started ramping up its production of championships. So you had private people sort of jump into the whole game, host very large-scale events that got in international talent into this country. Not that we never had it before. There were championships that were running a lot more statured drivers in India before. But now it became a little bit more formal, a bit more serious, right? We started creating categories that would eventually sort of help a driver reach a certain level and then springboard somewhere else. So the system started, heating up. So I was like, yeah, this is the moment. Like, so far it's been really like feeling the water, if it's cold, if it's hot. Now it's heating up. So let's jump in. So that's kind of been my journey. So it was always about never really out of the ecosystem. I was in the corporate. I had a stint at an investment bank, then in the impact venture capital space, and I always had an eye out on motorsport just to see what's happening. When's the right time to kind of springboard, and that 2023, 2022-ish was the right moment. So I took a leap.
So that's how today we have Hairpin Co.
Yes, Hairpin Media now officially.
Okay.
Yeah.
If for our viewers and us too,
Yeah.
if you have to say what Hairpin Co. or Hairpin Media does, tell me in 3 sentences. Just 3.
Okay. I'm going to try. So one, we're building the commercial and the cultural ecosystem of the sport in this country. And I'm saying very specifically this country. We have a very global, like a very Asia-driven global vision for it. But then our beachhead is always going to be India because we are based here and we can immediately see the problems and the problems that we can solve here, right? So one, we're building that ecosystem. The second is we are trying to elevate the look and the feel of motorsport through design. And third is we're trying to build a community that is more consuming and more invested in the sport. What we need is an audience that wants to go beyond just Formula One, right? We want to show them that India has produced talent for the past 60 odd years, more than that, I would say. But just that we don't have the local support like we do for cricket, like we do for Olympic sports, because obviously motorsport is not a part of the Olympics. We tend to miss out on talent to catch them young and to support them till they reach a certain point that they can represent us and be proud of being Indian at that global stage. So those are the 3 things. I think I've covered it all.
Pretty much. I think when we were discussing, at least I was thinking about it that way. It's like an umbrella and you have like multiple verticals to it. How do you sort of tie it together?
Hairpin Media at the top, that's what operates everything.
Okay.
Under that, we've got Hairpin Co., which is a journalistic platform, which is what you see on all of our media outside. do a lot of content around Asians in global motorsports and Asian motorsports as a whole. The second is, it's called Talented ASF. It's not what do you think it is. It's Talented Athlete Sponsorship Fund. So it's basically...
Sounds cool that way too.
Right. It was intentional, but...
nice.
Yeah, but it's a sponsorship platform essentially. So we want to raise or get in private capital and private, players into the ecosystem, because so far it's very... Either you have to be self-funding, bootstrapped, or you are basically charity. We don't want that charity angle at all. Then the third is 10,000 Hours, which is basically our community wing.
Okay.
And we do a lot of hosting events and so on and so forth. And the fourth is called...
1 second. Why is it called 10,000 Hours?
We haven't actually launched it yet fully, but 10,000 Hours is supposed to be... At least not typically, you're not counting 10,000 hours, but at the 10,000th hour plus, you would essentially be a master of your own field.
Oh, interesting.
So it's a Malcolm Gladwell theory.
Okay.
But again, the problem that a lot of people have with this is, I've done 10,000 hours or something. I'm not an expert. That's not the idea. It's the thing that every effort counts, every hour counts.
It doesn't translate exactly that way.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So these are what we do as a whole. So we are handling, and the fourth vertical is something called Circle of Fifths. That's our design vertical. That's the medium through which we work with drivers, with a lot of promoters to elevate their design. Because we think, or we're of the opinion, that good design speaks much louder than something that's badly put together or without any sense. Because it's very easy to hop on a Canva today and then slap three things together and then call it a day. But then where is that class? Where's that finesse? Where's that touch, right? What speaks your language is something that we want to identify, and we want you to have it, because the whole point is that you have to make sure that language translates across everything. Not just the way you speak, but the way you come across, the way you're on social media, everything.
Subhash keeps telling this phrase, it's the taste that you develop and the flavor you bring out. So
Always.
That's what you're solving for.
Yeah, and I'm sure you relate to this even more having an agency, right? Because it's so difficult in an already cluttered media space, the universe that we live in, the everyday life that we consume online. Everybody seems to do something similar. It's a bit like having you do the same thing, just in you see different people doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But then you're not doing the same thing. Everybody is on a different journey. Everybody's got a different way that they do things. And that's what social media is supposed to capture. The language that you speak with, the kind of posts that you put out, that has to be unique. It has to be individual. If everybody's doing the same thing, that's not fun.
Yeah, it
You're
has
just
to be
scrolling.
you. Yeah.
Right? You want to stop that
Scream
stupid
and shout
scrolling.
I know one size doesn't fit all, but it's very hard to kind of replicate what you've done with your interest in the sport, baby steps into it, and then the trajectory going forward. But anyone who's listening to this has even remotely close interest as you have to the sport, and probably start something in this space. What is a map that you would give them? Hey, probably you need to focus on these 3 things, or this is how you need to think through.
I think I'm speaking for sports at large, okay? I think it's amazing that sport is one of those few things where you don't need a degree or a specific sort of certification to really get started. It's all about identifying what you like doing and then finding an outlet through sports. And also, the way you build a career here is about whom you know inside of sport. Because you always need an inlet into sport. You can apply through job portals and all of that. That's different. That also works. But there's a good chance that if you're starting out in India, somebody introduces you to the sport and you are so good at what you do as a skill that you are able to apply yourself perfectly in sport. Now, I know this is going to be a controversial opinion. People are like, no, there's a certified path to sports.
Yeah.
Sure, there can be, but trust me, there is the best of people in sports, the executives that you see making the biggest of decisions, there's a likelihood that they don't come from a sports background. They never studied sports. They are just fans for life who found an application through sports with skill that they've kind of built along the way. For me, I took learnings from being in the corporate, the dynamicism that I found in working through, with startups through Impact Venture Capital. And then you sort of take in both the sides, and then you see, okay, what needs discipline, but at the same time, what needs flexibility.
Okay.
Right? Discipline.
That fine balancing act.
Always. And how do you apply it in sports? And that's where you learn. I've learned how to build businesses by watching people build businesses. So you apply fundamentals of that, and then learnings from everything, and then you create a product. And that's basically how you get started. For anybody that wants a career in sports, though, it's traditional. Like you know what you're good at. You find jobs that allow you to do what you're good at, and then sports becomes a medium. So you can find that medium through having the connections, or second, making those connections. You have to build, you have to invest into those kind of relationships. Or the third is your average job portals and whatnot. But the likelihood is that one of the first two will help you a lot more. Yeah. That's the way it works.
So we sort of come to some kind of a zero in on network effects works the best.
Always.
Here.
Yeah.
What is the sort of trajectory that a person can think through? Now, let's just say I have the people and I have the connections and I have some money.
Before we go into this, how do you build that connections? Like, is there a way where you could go out and do it? Like,
I think just
community platforms.
I'm a firm believer in something called ethical networking. Like a lot of people, I don't know if you guys have been a part of these networking sessions where you go into a room and the first thing you do is hand a card. It's like, but what am I going to do? I don't know what you do. So you need to be curious first, right? Just ask the other person, what is your job? What do you do? And ask them questions about their job. Because if you don't have that curiosity, you're not building that connection.
Right.
If you go shove a card in somebody's face, like, that does nothing for me. Like, I don't care. I genuinely don't care. So what can you offer before you take something from somebody? Find out that sort of arrangement for yourself. And then go into, and if you've got that crux right, you can quite literally, like you did with me on LinkedIn, reach out and give your proposition, get on a conversation, and then build that. Because I think chatting doesn't really build much. You have to get on a call or get face-to-face through a virtual call and then build that up.
Right.
Because people need to put a face to a voice or a text. Because today you don't know who is, chat GPTing anything.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't want to be speaking to a bot on the other end. You want to be talking to a real human being.
Yeah.
So make that work. But I think today, because we live in such a decentralized world as it is, it's very easy to get connected to anybody 3 oceans across.
Right.
So make sure you do that, because what we were just talking about this earlier, who you are today is influenced by your surrounding. That is this 5 people around you primarily, and then the ecosystem that you have been built, you've grown up in, and the ecosystem that's around you. But then what really changes you as a person, your understanding, and kind of broadens your horizon is what happens, a little bit further down. What happens in Singapore? What happens in Hong Kong? What happens in the UK? That helps you understand what are the gaps today. Some of it might not make sense, but then some of it you kind of learn because you want to build towards that, because that's, according to you, the right way of doing things, right? Which is kind of what happened with me as well. Because I was writing, and that kind of written work leads you to different worlds. Different kind of people reach out to you. You see that, okay, it's done slightly differently there. So what do I take from there? And then what do I take from this side of town? That's how you build networks. Very simple. Don't go shove a card in somebody's face.
Don't go shove a card.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so considering that someone has done a decent job at it, and of course I don't think it's a one man effort at any point of time.
No.
families need to have that connect. You need to have that connect. You need to have either that skill or personality or money or power or both, a combination of all of these factors. And let's say someone does crack that code and gets in. What is the trajectory like? Right now, what I see as an F1 fan too is like, okay, someone in global sports starts from go-karting and they go through levels and levels and levels, and they're heavily backed by sponsorships, and that's how it goes about. Is there a set trajectory, and does the same global sort of structure replicate in Indian motorsports too?
So, are we talking about a driver specifically?
Is there something else that I was thinking of from a driver POV only, but
Okay.
is there a second phase to it too?
Not really.
Not really.
So, like, if you're a sports professional like I am, there's no set trajectory.
Okay.
Right? That is something that you kind of build and you figure along the way. What works, what doesn't work, who is good, who's not good. If you're a driver, there is more or less a global pathway to get to where you want to be. Right? So let's say it's Formula One. Then you start with go-karts. Then you graduate into cars. And within cars, you've got like regional series. Then you've got international series. But essentially, all of them fall under the F4 bracket.
F4, okay.
Right? Then you graduate to something called Formula Regional.
Okay.
Formula Regional is more or less, it's a new sort of category which they've formalized over the last couple of years. But it's a bridge between F3 and F4.
Okay.
In between.
Okay.
Slightly more higher powered cars than F4, but less powered cars than F3. That way. And there are regional championships across. You've got a Formula Regional Middle East, you've got a Formula Regional Europe, you've got Formula Regional Americas as well. So you've got these regional championships. Fewer number than F4. Then once you're done with that, you go to F3, then F2, and then F1. That's the most ideal pathway. But obviously, the world doesn't work in ideal pathways because, like, literally the stars have to align for you to take the ideal pathway, right? So there's a good chance that once let's even say you win the championship in F2, logically next year you should be in F1, but it doesn't happen that way, right? So they end up doing a lot of these other series that exist, and there's a good chance. Oh, a lot of them. So for instance, there are a lot of people that move to Indy Next, which is happening in the Americas. A few others, they go into GT cars, which is a lot of Europe, a lot of Asia as well. Because Formula One is so selective and it's only a pool of 20 seats, there's a good chance that you're not really making it there, right? The odds are always going to be against you. So in such a scenario, you branch out into different things that will give you a career. So you go into GT racing, you go into endurance racing. And a lot of people make that choice quite early on these days. What I've had it's a surprising but nice change. I've seen kids that come up to me and say, I want to be a part of the Le Mans. Not F1, nothing like that. I want to do the Le Mans, which is very interesting because like 10 years before, nobody would have told me I want to get into the Le Mans.
Right.
But I see kids saying, I want to do the Le Mans this time. And GT cars are also really picking up in popularity. Like, I want to be a GT3 driver. Like, that is their goal. They want to be a factory driver because factory drivers get paid. So it's nice that the horizon sort of expanding and people are able to, at least drivers are able to understand that, you can have a dream of Formula One, but you have to be practical and realistic. Because Formula One is really a hit or miss considering how many seats you've got. And considering you've got 40-year-olds on the grid who just don't want to leave their seats, it's a real problem. Like, vacated. You need more young blood in this. There are certain set pathways to get into the sport depending on what your end goal is. But there's a good chance that everybody sort of starts at a karting level, does F4, does a bit of rallying, does a bit of autocross racing and so on. And for a rally, it's a completely different sort of trajectory. You don't even need to do karting. Like, we three could go to rally school and suddenly see ourselves in like a national rally championship. I'm serious.
Subhash is excited now.
I'm serious. So very interestingly, rally in India, you need to have a valid driver's license.
Okay.
So you
That's
could
it?
only do... Yeah, no, of course you need a racing license as well. You need a racing
It's like,
license.
that's the bar to entry.
I have it.
and a lot of money in the bank. Just because damages are high. And not just that, like setting up the car is also expensive.
Right.
So all of that given, it's a completely different sort of trajectory. So if you want to get into rally,
Interesting.
you kind of start by doing autocross events. You learn in parking lots, and then you suddenly just go into competition, and then you kind of climb on from there. Obviously, in India though, the ceiling it comes very quickly.
Very quickly.
So you need to look at what is outside, what's next, and because till India you've got it sorted. Like national championship, okay, I won the championship. Now what? Another championship? Okay, fine, let's do another championship this year. But okay, how does this add value to me? Is a question you need to keep asking.
I am noticing that we are coming back to this a bag of money problem, right? Let's put a number to it.
Right.
Say someone's coming to F4. Approx. How much does it take in your bank account to reach till there? Anyone who has connection, skill, and the money in getting there, what's the money in the bag?
If you get to F4, then you would have done at least 4 to 5 seasons of karting. 4 to 5 seasons of karting would be about 10 to 20 lakhs a year. Let's average it to about 15 lakhs a year. 15 into let's say about 4 would be about, let's even say with travel, blah blah blah, all of that, you're looking at about
80 lakhs, 1
yeah,
crore?
1 crore ish. More than that. I'm taking
Like bare
all the
minimum.
additional costs, right? So traveling costs, international racing costs, everything. You're looking at 1.5, 2 crores that you'll spend.
Just for F4.
No, for karting.
Just karting.
Karting.
This is
5
not
years of
even
karting.
intern.
3 to 5 years
I
of
need
karting.
to wake up.
Because you're adding in suit costs, your helmet costs, your entry fees, your training fees, everything, transport.
So,
flights.
like F1, is there also like what do they say? Like your licensing cost?
Yeah. Racing license.
Everything.
Racing license is also cost. So you're putting in a lot of this thing, like a lot of effort and time. Maybe if you want to keep it hyper realistic, let's even say it's 1.5 crores, right? You
Right.
get the cheapest deal ever. You're looking at 1.5 crores over, let's say, a couple of seasons of karting, say 4 seasons of karting. Then after that, you jump into F4. F4 is a minimum. You're looking at $100,000, about 80 lakhs,
Again.
right? About 80 lakhs, correct?
Oh, yeah.
100,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100K. Yeah,
Close, close, close.
Right.
right? 80 lakhs. So a crore. Then you have to add in all your, even the helmet changes, like once you hit F4, you
Yeah.
need different homologations and all of that. Then damage bills, and then your transport costs, testing costs, because you can't do testing, you can't jump into an F4 right after karts, you have to do testing. So all of that cost is another, add in some 20-30 lakhs. It is an expensive sport.
Yeah.
Very, very expensive.
But this change in mindset of people wanting to go and diversify other than F1, F2, is this an intrinsic, like an ambition change, or is it market factors or a business POV that's changing?
In the sense, okay, I'm in this trajectory, but now I need to pivot. That
Like
change you're talking
anyway, intrinsically, I know I can't get to F1. Let me try other things. Is it a personal, intrinsic decision, or is it market forces, or from a business point of view saying this is anyway not going to get any money at any point, might as well just switch, or is it a combination?
Actually, that's what I was saying. So earlier, right, like even if we're talking 10 years back, I think it would have been a very market-driven change. Saying, okay, fine, this is getting unsustainable for me. I love this sport. I can't get out of it. I change. I become a different human on track. I need that feeling with me all the time. But if I can't get to F1, I might as well try something else. But now I'm seeing that a lot of people, that I need to do something else factor is coming in very quickly. And that's not this thing of the market. That is a personal choice that you make. That I find, GT cars are much more cooler. It's fun. Sustainable, you get paid. Or endurance racing, okay, let's say you got 3 drivers in a team. One has to be a gentleman driver. He's basically footing the bill. So it's a smarter decision to make without hurting my family, without, spending years in sponsorship, finding tasks and so on. So yeah, it used to be oh, I can't get to F1, might as well do something else. But now it is more of a, and it's a good change. Now it's more of a, I want to do the Le Mans, I want to do endurance racing, I want to do rally, which is good. It means
It's a more practical and plausible option now.
yeah.
And also, like, more avenues are opening up
Very
for
much,
riders.
very much.
Right.
Like in India, rallying, and I still consider it to be in the grand scheme of things, where you've got Formula One making single seaters popular, rally somewhere just like in the corner there, because the World Rally Championship is not doing. It's not in the best of health, right? As a championship, so naturally it doesn't trickle down all the way. But the rally community here is very, very robust. It's a very popular form, just that they don't talk too much about themselves, which is sad because rally is actually really, really fun.
Yeah.
Just to get to the rally, if you are young, like I said, you have to be 18. But if you're, let's say, 15 or like 14, there are like private leagues that have come in so that they can bridge that gap. So you can do autocross, for instance.
Okay.
And then the two-wheel market is really heating up. So you've got supercross racing now, which is much more sustainable. You do it you don't need like large amount of land. You can do it in a cricket stadium. And cricket runs maybe, let's even say, half the year. The other half is though, it's empty, right? So what do you do with that kind of space? You can change it. You can bring people a different form of entertainment. These are literally bikes flying in air. So that's fun. That's a spectacle to see. It's something to watch. So it's becoming a real good career avenue, right? You've got World Supercross Championships as well, which is run on a global scale. But in India, I see like they have a category where they've got like kids at the age of like 8, maybe 10. These kids are like flying in the air on these mini bikes. It's the coolest thing to see. I spoke with the founder of this league, the Indian Supercross Racing League, and they are so enthusiastic about building that sort of thing because they've come from that era where Supercross used to be a big thing in India. Then it just kind of faded out, right? And they're trying to rebuild it again, which is, it's so cool to see because the founders are excited, the riders that are there are super excited. The fans, they're selling out stadiums. Like the Bangalore round, I was there, it was packed. And I've never seen people come to a motorsport event. Like I've been to F4, I've been to the Indian Racing League. No,
people don't show up.
Supercross, they have packed out this thing. Probably because it's a different model of sport, right? It's easier to fill a set stadium than it is to fill an entire ground of a 5-kilometer track.
Right.
Because that is also split. You don't have grandstands everywhere. You got one stand and then you got a second stand like 2 kilometers away. That's the way it is.
So which format does attract most viewership? Say physical presence.
In India?
Yeah.
I think right now it would be the Supercross Racing League. Like right now.
Right.
But globally, if you see, the single seaters kind of bring in a lot of crowd as well. Like for me, the closest thing I can relate to, I wouldn't say grassroots, but national level, is Super Formula in Japan.
Okay.
Huge audience. And then you've got the Nürburgring Landstruck Series, which is the Nürburgring Endurance Championship. They open out the gates and you've got like 100,000 people going through. So it's amazing. Even at a national level, there are championships that are able to pull up that sort of a crowd. But in India, I think the closest that comes to a real audience watching, it would probably Supercross, because they've done a fantastic job in getting that hype out there. And the second is it's an easier task to fill stadiums because there's a finite space.
Makes sense.
So you see certain things from this spot. It doesn't change depending on where you are.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So India is more like, what do you think is India's taste in motorsport? Is it like single seater or is it something else?
Good question. I think India's taste in motorsport is Formula One. So I am very harsh in saying that. I know there are a lot of people here that follow a lot more than just Formula One. I think MotoGP is also becoming popular. Yeah. Only because of the Bharat GP that happened, 2 years back. But primarily for India, motorsports is Formula One. the average consumer here, the average Rahul over here is going to say, oh, I love motorsports. F1 is so great.
Yeah.
Right? I think with broadcast rights becoming a little bit more stringent and in a way a lot more OTTs coming into play who are purchasing these streams, I think it's becoming a lot more diversified. Now people are like, you'll see WRC decals on these taxis, which is the coolest thing ever
Yeah.
because you never see that. I've seen
Yeah.
F1 decals, right?
Yeah.
But WRC, not so much. But there's a certain understanding. And recently, because of Ajit Kumar's involvement in
Right,
motorsport,
right.
it's so
Thank God he picked
fascinating.
up GT.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, people are like, I'm seeing the Creventic 24-hour series logos
Yeah.
everywhere. I was like, what is happening? And then
Yeah.
right next there, it's like Ajit Kumar. He's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that
That
is the
explains
effect.
it.
Right? That is the effect it has. So, yeah, so people are, because we've got like these one or two outliers, it's really becoming popular.
Right.
So people are now following F2 because of Kush,
Yeah, Kushmania.
right? So it's interesting. For the largest part, if you have to take motorsport audience in India, it's F1 audience. Because that's the only metric that's tracked.
In that sense, does Hairpin Media also put out more content, more driver management, or more buzz around F1?
No. We completely, because I'll tell you what, Neha, we've seen that everybody attacks the lowest hanging fruit, which is Formula One, because it's the easiest thing to do. But if you keep doing the easy things, you're not really moving the needle anywhere, right? And we are not here just to be content creators in motorsport. We don't want to just be fans. We can be fans sitting inside like our homes, right? But if you're working in it, you can't operate like a fan. So we said we will do everything but F1. Where's the farthest we've gone? I think we've covered the Oceania Championships that happen in New Zealand. Then we do the championships that happen in Japan, the local championships in Japan. So F4 Japanese, this thing, we've got the Super Formula Lights, all of that in Japan. Then we move this side, we do the Chinese races as much as possible because people don't know this, but the Chinese market for motorsports is massive. There are a lot of Chinese drivers and they're so widely spread, but you cannot find them on the internet. It's wild, right?
How does that work? Widespread but scarce to find.
I think the Chinese, they have their own media platforms that
makes
we
sense.
cannot access.
Right.
Or
That
rather we don't know how to access.
Like how every other vertical
Like,
functions for
we
China.
have WhatsApp, they have something else.
They have something
YouTube,
else.
they have something else.
They have
Exactly.
their own universe.
They
set
have
up.
their own universe. Yeah. So I don't know what that entry point is. So we track all of our news depending on how much ever we can see. Right? If there's a Chinese driver who's absolutely killing it. This year, a Chinese driver won the Le Mans 24 hours. Ye. So we're like, oh wow, okay, cool. Now let's trace him back all the way. So what's happening in China? That's how we figure it out.
Okay.
So we
It's like what they throw at us and then we
kind of
trace
pick it
back.
up. Yeah, it's a bit like forensic analysis. Like, oh yeah, what are the traces? Okay, I see some Chinese drivers here. What has he done?
Okay.
What have they done? Like, that's the way we go back to China.
Yeah.
But the Asian space, very, very interesting. Like, they've got their own cultures and subcultures within racing, which is fantastic. Thailand, a very, very strong hotspot for racing. Now they've come up with such good talent that is now on the grasp of Formula One.
Okay.
Wow.
So, yeah, a lot of Thai drivers, a lot of them, and like young karting drivers who are killing it in global motorsport. So yeah,
So Asian markets is booming for motorsports.
so
Or was it always booming but it's coming to light now? What is it? Which of the two?
I think it's taken its own sweet time to boom. You know, for the longest time, if you look at Asian motorsport, I would like to think that it is Japanese motorsport because that's where car culture was at its
Yeah.
finest, right?
It tracks with the automobile
Exactly.
market too.
Fuji and Suzuka and all these guys have been here for like 20, 30, 40 years. Japan was the automotive hub for the longest time. So naturally, people wanted to race these things the quickest, and the best way to do it is on a racetrack.
Yeah. And they have
so
drifting competitions also, which
drifts too.
which attract a lot more
Huge.
wider audience.
It's like a whole ecosystem in there.
It is. Japan's got everything. Like from endurance racing to circuit racing to drifting
Yeah.
to drag, they've got it all. And from there, now everybody sort of like picked up and it's now blooming in different spots. But you would still say that every region has its own strong spot. India brings in the numbers for F1. We are a huge F1 consuming audience.
Right.
In Japan is able to attract local audience for their local championships, which is insane, right? Then they've always got Formula One.
Yeah.
Singapore has got some very good drivers that are now coming up in the pipeline, but they don't have local infrastructure, right? So they have to export all of their talent, much like how Singapore naturally operates, right? And Malaysia has got a racetrack, a Formula One racetrack, but they've not got Formula One there. But they've got so many national series that's happening, from touring cars to GT cars. Everything happens in Sepang.
I am somehow drawing parallels to how I think about tech building and solving problems. Something is an infra problem, something is a GTM problem, something is a system problem, something is a problem. Like you've not found the right problem to solve. That's why you're going
My
back.
only question, what is India's problem?
Oh God, where do we start? Where do we end? India has got certain things right. Okay, so one, we've got, because our population is big, we've got a lot of good talent. And a lot of good talent has a lot of space to apply themselves. So for instance, India, again, I'll have to fact check this number a little bit, but we host somewhere anything between 14 to 17 different national championships.
Wow.
Right? Lot of avenue for people to be a part of, to take part in, to graduate from one series to the other, or switch between for track time, anything. But there is a set pathway for everything in India. So we do autocross, we do motocross, we do supercross, we do formula racing, we do two-wheeler, we do drag, we do drifts. We've covered it all. And there is hotspots for everything, right? And we've got a huge car culture.
We do.
As much as, Delhi loves like purchasing cars, Kerala loves fixing and adding body kits to it and modifying. It's huge. So we're very diverse and there's a lot of things that's brewing. The only problem is nothing is organized.
It's fragmented.
Always fragmented. So you've either got the championship and you don't know how to market it, or you've got the marketing right but the substance is crap, or you've got the right talent but you don't know how to leverage it. All of that is a problem. Or you've got all the infra but you've got no money to spend in like actually promoting it the right way. So
How do you think hairpin sits at the center of all this?
I think one, we are putting the focus back on people. I was inspired by people, which is why I got into the sport. I'm sure you guys were inspired by the drivers, is why you're watching F1. You are getting into rally because your friends were in rally. So there's always a human element to the sport, and that's why the sport thrives. So we are putting that human element back. So we really don't report on the news about qualifying, what happened. It doesn't make sense.
The stats.
Doesn't make sense for us. There are people that specialize in stats, but we go down the human storytelling method, right? We interview a lot of these drivers. We critically analyze why certain things are happening in global motorsport. Why is the Middle East coming up as the typically what we call a second motorsport season? Global motorsport seasons happening in the Middle East.
Right.
When Europe is shut down over the winter till April or March, from November to March, Middle East is running. And it's running in the same full swing that Europe would run. So we critically analyze why this is happening. Where is the money coming from? Who are the players involved? What are they doing differently? Right? And that's the level of nuance that not many people do, because they always go for the click, whatever gives them the most amount of click, number of clicks. So we're like, screw the click rate. We don't care. We want to make sure we're doing authentic storytelling.
Is there anything that is going on in their playbooks that India can emulate?
Oh, what's going on in there?
In their playbooks, how they function, how other regions function and up and coming.
In
Anything else that India can pick up from there and emulate within their ecosystem?
There's a set number of things from different championships that we can kind of take in, right?
Mix and match.
Yeah, always. Japan relies heavily on their local sort of, even the tires that they bring are local. The sponsors that they have are local Japanese businesses. The kind of people that they invite are also local. Most of the Japanese championships are filled with Japanese drivers, right? So their home ground is very, very strongly rooted in their roots. in a
Built
way.
by the local for the local. It's
Pretty
that way.
much. But I'll tell you what, the product is fantastic. I would say that a Super Formula car is a better prepping material than Formula 2 is. In terms of
Oh.
handling, in terms of power, in terms of the car, in terms of the competition. I would say, so in fact, Pierre Gasly, I think he did a year of Super Formula. Then he came back to Formula 1. Rather, I think he won the F2 I'm little hazy in that front. He won the championship, had 1 year. He didn't get that immediate graduation into F1. So he was advised to go do the Super Formula, then come back. Perfect
that's
prep material
interesting.
for F1. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Not even Formula 2. So great product there. And built for a global sort of outlook, but in Japan. What the Middle East does is they already have their coffers filled, right? So Middle East. But they applied really, really well. They found this amazing strategic advantage of being the Middle East and then forming that, and they've only played with the timings. Europe ends, Middle East begins. And Middle East is so well priced. It's not as expensive as Europe. Neither have they positioned themselves cheaply, right? So 3 months, 4 months, they finish everything. So people that come down from Europe, they spend a good solid 2-3 months in the Middle East, finish all their championship. And the best way to prepare for the European season next year is by racing, not by testing.
Yeah.
So they race in the Middle East, and you've got the best of talent racing in the Middle East.
That's why, because a racer has to keep it going and be in juices, sort of.
Always, yeah.
They've plugged and played in the right interval.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the biggest advantage that the Middle East has is obviously the way it looks and the feel and the infrastructure, but also they were spot on with the timing. That India could have actually also capitalized on, but I think we don't have that infra that that the Middle East has. The Middle East, like in Dubai, you've got more or less a grade 1 or 2 FIA graded circuit in Dubai. Then you've got Abu Dhabi. Then you can do Kuwait. Then you can do Qatar.
Yeah.
So you've got, and all of these are a 1 hour flight from each other, right?
The proximity matters too.
Of course. And then a little bit further, maybe say 1.5 hour flight, and then you're in Bahrain, and then you've got Saudi.
Right.
So everything and all of these countries have grade 1 circuits. So you get much better infra,
Right.
much better, like as a young driver, you need the right cars, the right track, and the right visibility. And Middle East has it all.
How many such or any tracks are there in India?
I can
Across tracks.
We've got only one grade 1 circuit, which is the Buddh International Circuit in Noida.
Which is not functional.
It is not currently functioning for its intended purpose. It is still functioning. They have a lot of these supercar days, something like that, like private events and all of that. But racing does not happen there. But now we've got the Madras International Circuit, which is not a grade 1 circuit, but it's graded well enough to run Formula 4 cars comfortably. Then you've got Coimbatore, Curry, which makes it 3. Then there's a new project in development in Pune.
Okay.
Then there's one in Bangalore called Bren Raceway, which is done by Bren.
Bren Garage. Bren?
Yeah, same guys.
He's the real estate guy.
Correct. So there's now 5 major circuits that I can think of.
Where is this coming up? In Bangalore?
Bren? Somewhere in the outskirts, somewhere towards the northeast.
Devanahalli side.
Not Devanahalli, this side. Like, I think Hoskote side.
Oh.
Hennur, Hoskote.
Like Whitefield, Hoskote, and
I think so. Somewhere that
after
side.
that.
Somewhere there.
Got it.
That's where it's coming up.
Somehow all the pieces that we've spoken together is tying together now. I'm able to get, okay. Makes sense.
So there is infra that's coming up. And it's coming up because there is a market for it. But of course, the access to it is a different question. Only because it's so expensive. Like as a kid, imagine you're a parent, you have to spend a decent 10 lakhs on a racing season. At a karting
it's a
level,
season is 10 lakhs.
5 races.
Yeah, it's 10 lakhs.
Yeah. That's a karting championship cost today. You can there'll be trolls on the internet say, "Oh, I can do it for cheaper." Yeah, you can.
They try
But
doing
what
it,
is your no?
Yeah.
But what is the aim? You want to win.
right?
So
You want
would
that-
you compromise an entire year in going for the cheapest where you don't have, or you have to scramble for parts, all of that? Or would you be in a relatively comfortable position to go and at least try to win the championship?
Right.
Not win it, but try to win.
And I'm guessing the prize money will also be decent enough that
Here's the funny thing about motorsport, there is no prize money.
for this,
There is no prize money.
as expected, some form of prize.
Yeah,
money,
like I mean,
crazy.
see, there were certain years you would have prize money, certain
Okay.
years you would not have prize
So-
money.
if you get into karting, you're not making any money. You're just spending it.
Even if you get into Formula 4, you're not making any money. You're just spending it.
Where do you start making money?
Formula 1.
That's the ceiling.
No, wait. So you don't make money at all before that?
No, you make
Wow.
money through brand endorsements, sponsorship deals.
Right.
The auxiliary
Thank
that
God
comes
that
with it.
happens.
Yeah, you do not make money racing cars unless you get into. That's why GT cars. If you're in as a factory driver, like you're racing for the
Ah.
Audi factory team,
Right.
then you make money because you're a paid driver, and there's a good chance that you are an employee of Audi,
Yeah.
and you'd have to test their cars as well.
Okay.
You have a
Makes
day
sense.
job.
Mm.
But if you are not a factory driver or you're not bankrolled by somebody else, good chance you're not getting paid. So it's very unlike a normal conventional job. And I know this is going to go out in public, and there were certain years where you had prize money as well, but it's peanuts. Like compared to what you spend on racing, what you make back is very little. Even in prize money, what you'll get $50,000, not more than that. Trust me.
No wonder people think about. I mean, what
But
is the
how
future?
is this different in Europe than, let's say, in
Europe is also similar, except there you at least get something back. So I'll tell you what, I haven't studied the European market too much.
Right.
But in Malaysia,
Right.
if you're doing the GT championship or you're doing the touring car championship, if it's a Toyota series,
Mhm.
then you actually get, the winner gets prize money.
Right.
And that's like 12,000 ringgits, 18,000 ringgits,
right.
that sort of thing.
And I'm guessing the car will be taken care from the company, so they
You-
are not worrying about spending on the car.
It's not that. There's always an entry fee that the driver has to pay,
Right.
generally.
Right.
And at least if you win, you make back that sort of entry fee.
Ah,
That's the correlation you have to. You don't make
Got it.
comfortable living out of it.
makes sense.
I have another question. When you represent drivers, when
Yeah.
you take care of them, what do you get out of it other than brand building for them and brand building for yourself? What is your ROI?
I don't have an ROI. Like, we spend so much of time in negotiating deals, in finding these deals for drivers. Okay, yes, you've got a retainer that you kind of have. At some point, that also starts becoming invaluable because what you're essentially giving and developing for a driver is their network, right? And that takes a lot of time. But for me personally, I want to be involved in a journey where I take somebody from grassroots to, the topmost of motorsport. So for me, I don't really calculate what my return is as long as the driver is doing well and we are developing them or giving them the right means to fight with. They're not going into a gunfight with a knife. As long as that's the case, I'm happy with it. But in all honesty, the amount of time that I spend on it, I don't really make much out of it. But I do it because I have a personal vision. I have to see Asia being represented in the right light. And there needs to be a local role model that is sitting here and developing talent here. For instance, we're working with a Singaporean driver. Singapore is now, I think next year they're going to lose their karting track,
Oh,
right? But you've got talent in Singapore. Like we cover a lot of these drivers week in, week out. And for them, the next best country to go to is Malaysia. But what about
right.
local Singaporean talent? You've got a Grand Prix there, but no karting tracks. Can you believe the anomaly that it
Yeah.
is? So it's,
Why though? Why are they losing there?
I think something else is that land is being acquired for something
Okay.
else. But the problematic thing is that there was no backup plan to, build another kart track. And that is
The problem.
that is a bit dicey. So for me, it's to make sure that we don't end up in a situation like that. Like, there needs to be constant demand. You need to have people on tracks. You need to be doing these things. And I'm focusing on motorsport because I've been here too long, but this is the case for any sport. The last thing you want is talent to die out because infra is not there, or there is nobody to represent them from this country, right? And sport is, I'm a big believer in sport bringing change. Like you will have an IOC team, like in the Olympics, you've got the refugee team, right? Which exists to represent people that are displaced.
Right.
Why? Because it gives them a beacon of hope. It's the same thing.
It's the representation.
It's the representation. And we have to make sure that at every level, we've got representation. From driver's perspective, I think we're getting there. We definitely are getting there. Right now, the Formula Regional that I was telling you about, I think something like 40 to 45% of the grid is Asian. It's fantastic because I never thought that we would have... The Indian F4 grid is not like... It's got like 2 Indians on it. But you've got Freca, which is
How
got
do we feel about that?
2 Indians on the F4 grid.
Yeah.
I think there is a fair reason why, because we're at this interesting point in Indian motorsport where all your talent is going to graduate, right? And they are going from, karting to a little bit of LGB national championships here and there, and they've all run out of budgets. So an F4 becomes a lot of pressure, or repeating an F4 becomes a lot of pressure. So they would rather like, okay, let me save up, let me do something cheaper, and then let me go to a bigger F4 somewhere else. So let's do the Middle East, or let's do the Italian F4, or the British F4, something like that, or the Southeast Asian F4. But basically, the Indian F4 I think is very well priced. It's value for money, but still for the Indian market, when you're saying somewhere between 70,000 euros to 100,000 euros, it's a lot of money.
Doesn't track.
Yeah.
Certain people can do it. That's different. And I think most people can do it. But it's about, where do you want to spend that money? Would you want to spend it in India, or would you want to save for another year and spend double of it in the Middle East?
Yeah. Where
It's
your
a-
visibility
Is there a
much higher.
strategy for this? Like, do you see that this move is better than the other move because of ABC?
Yeah, there's always, because every championship comes with its own set of what it brings to a driver. It's not always about how much the driver can pay.
Right.
It's how much the driver can also get back from the organizers, right? So if you go to a Middle East, let's not even say the Middle East. Let's say it's the F4 UAE trophy, right? It's a 3 series. It's literally half of an F4 championship. It runs between November and December, just 3 races. But one of the races happens as a feeder series to Formula 1 in Abu Dhabi.
Oh, it's
So-
that placement.
It's the placement. So is it okay paying a premium for that championship? Yeah.
Worth it.
Worth it. Because you don't know whom you're going to bump into.
Yeah.
Right? Or who's going to, some Formula 1 driver, some Formula E driver is going to walk down the track, and then you have a chance of meeting them.
And also the talent that works behind these drivers, they are also in the track. They're just like seeing.
It is.
Like, you never know what you end up becoming.
Exactly. So what you get from that championship and
way more.
how much you give in, there's a very fine balance.
It's like a trilogy. Like, it's talent, it's bag of money, it's network, and it's just passing the parcel. It's always
Pretty much.
that
There are
way.
outliers that will say, I came from nothing and I'm here, which is fantastic if you've done that. But I think that is an exception, not the case. The case is that there's a good chance that you're backed up in one way or the other. And there's no harm in saying, yeah, I am backed up, because that's what you need for the sport. You can't be running on, your own self-generated human fuel.
Yeah.
So one thing that Hairpin Media does season after season or very frequently is, I recently saw you did like a greet and meet sort of a thing with drivers when they were here. You do watch parties.
Yeah.
What else does Hairpin Media do? That's community facing, or that's awareness, or anyone
That's
who wants to get
Okay.
in touch with Hairpin Media. How can they?
I think these are our two, like one is through content that you see outside. We get a lot of, most of our followers, like all the people that follow our content, right? These are not casual fans of sport. Like they are very, they want to know more. They want to dig deep, which is why they follow us.
Ardent followers.
Yeah, more than that, it's somebody that's slightly even a bit more curious than, reading the headlines of F1. So those guys tend to get in touch with us, and a lot of them in our DM saying, "Hey, can you cover this? Hey, I went to XGP. I want to write my this thing review on it." So I think, yeah, why not? Because that's the whole thing. We don't want to be an upstuck sort of, I will only allow journalists on my platform. No, everybody's a journalist. Like, if you just apply yourself, you need to have critical thinking. That's it. And if you're not afraid of opinionating, then you're as good as a journalist. And the second is the watch parties. Actually, we very intentionally did it in a coffee shop, because you can go to a bar or a pub that hosts Formula One. And I think somebody brought this to my attention. I think it was one of you only that said
Subhash did.
Subhash did. Yeah.
Football,
Formula One.
yeah.
Yeah.
Football and not even football, sorry. Cricket and Formula One are the only ones that
only ones get played on bars.
In bars, right?
Yeah.
So
There's no other way.
exactly. And because we are in that sort of sweet spot of having these bars and pubs, I think they invite a lot of casual fans, and you lose connection with each other when there's so much of loud noise around you and so many people all just crammed in like one place. So he said, okay, we'll shut the music. We'll take out the alcohol, because you don't need to be inebriated to like enjoy the sport.
Right.
And we will give you coffee instead.
Oh.
So you don't
Wild.
you don't develop heart disease in the meantime. You just drink coffee and talk about the
You'll
sport.
maybe be dehydrated.
Yeah, that's it. And for that, we'll give you water. So nature's hydration.
Yeah.
Natural hydration. So he said, okay, come to a coffee shop, small group of people. We can yell across the coffee shop and, say what a bullshit move this was on the racetrack. And then everybody can jump in on the conversation, right? It doesn't have to be just between the three of us, which is what tends to happen in bars. Because you go with a group of friends and you want to have a good time just with your group of friends, not anybody else.
It's a closed loop.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is when you get people in a coffee shop all yelling at the screen at the same time, everybody has a chance to like get their voices heard, which is awesome.
Interesting. Yeah, how are like this Southeast Asian markets like exactly performing in this segment currently?
I think they have a way to go, but they are already much ahead of what I thought they would be. Actually, I'm similar to a lot of people. You kind of look at Formula One from the Formula One lens, and then you judge how the market is doing. But actually, if you look from a from a bottom up approach, you realize that there is a lot more that these markets have to offer. And the unfortunate thing, and which is where we kind of come in as well, is we started reporting on Southeast Asia and Asia as a whole only because you've got so much focus on European motorsport that you feel that European motorsport is the only one that exists. And most of the media houses are based in the West. So there's a good chance that they don't get the eyeballs from the East, or they don't get the clicks from the East. So they're not really reporting on East. So we said, okay, let's start talking about things that's happening in the East, because it's the most accessible markets to us. So I'm sure that even if Malaysia does not have an F1 race, even though they've got an F1 circuit similar to us, they've got a very robust, system of motorsport, which is true, which is what ended up, what we ended up seeing, similar to India. So, okay, how are they sort of leveraging it? Where are those athletes going? Where are they concentrated? Most Malaysians, you'll see, they go into GT. So you start developing patterns in the way that a country consumes and the country sort of promotes talent. I think that's a very interesting sort of thing to see, because now you're focusing on one thing and you get to get maximum insights out of it.
You're niched down to one region or a one segment, and then
and you learn, there's that opportunity to learn from different cultures, the way they interact with the sport, the way they promote the sport. So which is what we sort of wanted to explore, and we are doing it. And one other thing is, there's a twofold thing for us. Like, our vision is kind of split into two. One is promote what we have already. And the second is to grow our talent. And our talent is across Asia, and we want to make sure that they're not just popular in Asia, but also in global motorsport. Because ultimately nobody's taking away from the fact that the Formula One wind and the motorsport wind is always kind of left leaning. It's more than left, sorry, it's west leaning, westward. So you want to be there. And at least when you're there, you want to be there competing with them on equal foot. Right? So
That's a big gap to cover in itself.
only because ours is a much more convoluted way to get there. So for instance, if you're in Europe, you're based in, let's say, a Germany or a Hungary or something. Every racetrack in Europe is accessible to you within a train ride. It's not the same for if you're India. So okay, fine, we've at least got racetracks across, and it's a big country. Imagine you're from Singapore. You can go to Malaysia, you can do the Asian circuits where you don't have much of so much of fervor as much as the West has. So you've got to take the minimum flight out of here to go to at least in England or at least Germany.
So the
or France.
logistics, the transport, the cost, the setup, all of that adds up.
Always adds up. Yeah. So we're like, okay, fine. They need all the coverage they can get, because one way that we can change this game is by throwing the spotlight back on them. So you get
putting it back on people, as you said. That's what
exactly.
What Hitman is doing.
Put it back on people. Let brands know that there is something like this. There is a person like this that might be aligned to their brand values. That might be a good face for their ambassadorship. So let's make that connect happen, which is where we kind of tie in the athlete sponsorship fund. We tie in the branding and the marketing front, because you need somebody making good value propositions out of athletes for brands and brands for athletes. And yeah, the community we get them together there's F1, the next hour, but you come for F1, but you learn something about Indian motorsport or about a new driver that's coming up and how they navigate the space. So that's kind of how the entire thing ties together, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think the athlete and sponsorship is like a symbiotic relationship.
Very much.
And the community is like the awareness part of it, where slowly the stigma of motorsport in India is F1 is getting diluted.
Yeah.
But in reality, actually expanding onto what motorsport actually is.
Yeah. Which is a good thing. It's always a good change to see.
Yeah.
It's naturally happening. Thanks to Drive to Survive, I believe. Like somewhere I have to thank them.
Are you guilty of watching Drive to Survive? So many people binge watch it. Many people have gotten into F1 because of the DTS wave.
I couldn't get past season 1. I really couldn't. Like, I couldn't get myself to watch it. And I didn't care about it.
Die-hard F1 fans can't watch Drive to Survive, couldn't watch F1 movie. It's just the way it is.
I hated both. Like, I couldn't sit. The movie, I wanted to walk out at least 3 times.
The amount of craziness, I was like, if FIA was there, no way they would have let any one thing slide this way.
I understand. I also come from one of those compulsive, obsessive idiots of the sport. I shouldn't be one of those, but I'm guilty of being one of those. I just think the sport was always meant to be a sport, and we've turned it a bit into like a Keeping Up with the Kardashians-esque sort of serial, which I don't know, like
the fan club is like growing, which is good, but I don't think for the right reasons, if I may say.
No, it's fantastic. It's seriously, I think the worst thing is also a better thing than what it was 15 years ago. Trust me, when I was writing about F1, there was nobody to read it. People in my school, when I reach back to my friends of like 15, 17 years, they're like, oh, you're still doing something in F1. Oh, that's so cool. The only reason they're able to relate to that is because I was the only one back then that they knew that even watched a sport like this. It's better to have a bunch of fan girls and fanboys to talk to about it than having absolutely nobody.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's fantastic for the sport, and it's a model to be replicated, but not to the extent that it has. Like now, you've lost the core of what the sport is. Like everything is a TRP thing.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
I have to ask 2 questions to you. One is, you're a Lewis Hamilton fan. Please spill beans on what do you think about his move to Ferrari? Number one. You can answer any which way. Number 2, other than LH, current favorite driver on the grid.
His move to Ferrari. I have many thoughts being thumped at the same time. I think one, he should have retired at Mercedes.
Okay.
The Ferrari thing was just, I feel, like a tick box, like a tick
I'd
box,
rather,
a box to tick. Sorry, it is a tick box, I think, right? Is it
Yeah,
check box?
Checkbox.
Checkbox.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a checkbox. So it's like every driver has to sort of do that aspirational move to Ferrari and then
Yeah.
retire. It was one
Retire
of
as a
those-
Ferrari driver.
Yeah, one of those very ill-informed, baseless career moves ever. And second is, I know the way this team treats its drivers.
Yeah.
And the kind of, the lack of, I don't know, whatever in that team. So I never wanted to see Lewis suffer in that sort of a
He
team,
is,
that sort of
but-
an environment. They've already held Charles Leclerc in captive for I don't know how many more years his contract runs.
He's the favorite pet
27,
project.
29? Yeah, I think so. But that's one way to kill a career, I feel, in Ferrari. So I'm not a big fan of the move. Clearly.
Yeah, clearly.
Clearly. I'm also a Vettel fan and I know what happened
Yeah.
to him there.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely not a Ferrari fan.
Similar thing happened there too.
I think he had it worse, but yeah. I think Lewis, obviously, they won't not put him in priority because he's 7-time world champion. But I'm not a big fan of the move. And the second thing is, apart from Hamilton on the grid, who am I a fan of?
Yeah.
Actually, in all honesty, nobody. But I've got a massive respect for Max Verstappen.
Okay.
Because I know how much effort, I as a fan of somebody who's done this before, it is a lot of effort to align everybody and everything in a team to win as dominantly as he has and for as long as he did.
At a point, the whole car and the whole way that team functioned
Was Max.
was around him.
Yeah, he drove 2 cars for all you know.
Yeah.
Like he was basically...
He's still doing that even in this
I think
season.
so, yeah. So that is one... Imagine the pressure that must be on Max to do that. You win the constructors because of him. You are somewhere in the championship because of him. You build a team because he knows how to develop a car, right? Sure, Adrian Newey made the car, but who develops the car? It's not the engineers, it's the driver, because they give real-time feedback. So that's all on Max. And to do that as flawlessly as they have, 4 seasons in, it's mad. It's mad. Like, I don't think anybody else can do it. Even Lewis, yes, he won, 5 championships. 5 championships.
7
No, in a row.
in a row. I think
I think it's 5.
I have no clue.
Okay.
I think it's 5 championships in a row. It's a lot of effort. I know that for a fact, but I think there is something about the way that Max did it at the age at which he did it, and in the circumstances in which he did it is wild. Like, that Mercedes was already at its peak
Yeah.
when Lewis started winning. Sure, he got them
I
there.
mean, we saw that season, it was such a close
Yeah,
call.
he got them there. No taking away from that. That's a different story altogether. They've been at it since 2014, right? But the way that Red Bull basically switched the gear, and from there on, the way that Max has been leading that entire team is wild.
McLaren is sort of shifting that gear now at that point. Maybe not to the extent of what Red Bull did in comparison with Mercedes, but they're hella competitive this season too.
McLaren is a very interesting team because I think they've got one of the best zero to hero stories in the sport. I mean, if you are somebody that looks at the sport beyond the numbers and the statistics, and you're looking at the story of the way that McLaren, from near bankruptcy to almost losing their MTC, McLaren Technology Center, to now basically having the most I would think they're the most endorsed team on the grid right now. I think so. I don't know. The number of brands that they've activated, the amazing campaigns that they have run, I think it's wild. And they did that all basically over COVID and then 3 years after that.
Yeah.
So you're looking at a
Short build time.
very short build time, and that team was from zero to hero,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. But I
They
think
took some hard calls too. That's props to them too.
they took some very smart calls. Like hard calls is different. Like every team takes
Takes
hard
it.
calls. They took very smart calls, and they built that team from scratch, according to me, and that's fantastic. And it's all down to Zach Brown.
Zach Brown, yeah.
It's nobody else. And now the reason why we criticize them so much is because from a position of power, you don't want to lose it,
Yeah.
which is what they what they're doing without making the hard calls, right? Like choosing which driver you want to back and making sure that you do everything to make sure that chosen driver wins.
Yeah. Right now, that's the dicey situation. There.
That is the biggest situation they have. Like, you need to pick a number one. That's the way that's the way the world works.
I don't know which team principal said that, I don't remember. You can't have 2 number 1 drivers. You have to pick one if you're running for...
Probably Christian Horner. Probably Christian. Because I think that's the way he ran the team.
Yeah.
And that's how they
There's
got...
always a clear one.
Always. And that's the way the teams won, 7 constructors titles in the past, whatever, since 2013.
I mean, his chapter is another story, but the way he has built Red Bull is also phenomenal.
Insane. And he's the right story of being there at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Like he got graduated into the team principal role by joining essentially what was called a party team back then. And then growing that team strength by strength, driver by driver. And it just so happened that in those, say about 6 years, they had the best of drivers come into their junior program.
Yeah, the lineup was really good at all times, and the way they developed the car, obviously with Adrian Newey too, and he was just brutal. Like, you're in or you're out. There's no in between.
It's a bit like tough parenting.
Yeah.
Like, you need it. Certain people
I don't
thrive
know.
in
I
it.
am guilty of accepting this. I didn't like him when he was on the grid, but now that he's not there, I feel like, damn, like he was a good addition. Like, he actually did something really great with that team that I don't know how many could or can replicate. It's very difficult shoes to fill in, to be really
Huge.
honest.
Huge
But-
shoes. But I think that it's a sign.
Yeah.
Right? Every team that's at its top needs to fall and needs to get back up. And I think Red Bull's in that free fall moment now. But I'm sure they'll come back because they've got the playbook right. They
Right.
know what the core of the team, why they exist and what they need to do and how they need to do it. So it's just about time.
Hope for all the Red Bull fans.
I am a Red Bull fan.
There it is.
I'm a Red Bull fan because I grew up with the team. Just saying, since
Right.
2008.
Right.
I've been because of obviously Lewis came in. He won the championship in 08.
Yeah.
But Seb also
Came in.
did his first season was in 08 and he won with Toro Rosso.
Yeah. The
And
sister team.
Sister
Red
team
Bull.
of Red Bull. And then I was like, oh, Red Bull.
A lot of new drivers were launched through the Red Bull driving program. Toro Rosso, Carlos Sainz, I think few others too.
A lot of others.
Yeah, a lot of others.
Mm.
Pierre too. Yeah.
Alex Albon.
Albon.
A lot of them.
A lot of them.
They have an eye for picking.
All of them are actually good drivers. They're really good drivers.
On the F1 grid?
Yes.
Oh.
And whoever
100%.
came through the Toro Rosso training material.
I don't know what to call it. Somebody called it a production unit. But I don't think it was a production
The
unit.
saddest story of that is Daniel Ricciardo.
I have a different view on things. He kind of chose to make those moves. He
I
did.
always
he need
feel
not
that-
leave Red Bull at
Yeah.
in 2018. He need not have gone to Renault.
It
He
was a
picked-
downfall from there.
Yeah, he picked his poison, and it's just the wrong one. And it happens to everybody, right? Like it's one wrong move.
But then so many people bounced back. He just couldn't. Like, he
Who
couldn't.
bounced back after a bad move?
Hulkenberg bounced back. Now, for at least for his playbook, from nothing to a podium is something. Like 239 races without nothing.
Correct, but
To a podium.
I'm sure he's happy in that moment. But if you see the career trajectory he had, I remember 2012 when I was watching the championship finale in Brazil. I was very invested because it was that Alonso Seb battle. There was a very small difference between them. Hulkenberg was leading the race at some point, I think towards the ending. And very
choked.
randomly, he crashed.
He choked, yeah.
He choked, right? And that brought out the safety car, and the race ended in a safety car. And so he's had his multiple opportunities. He just couldn't take them all. And this one was a complete fluke.
You think so?
I'm not going to take away from the fact that they've put in their effort. I think they've put in a lot of effort. He has put in a lot of effort. And it's great to see him on the podium. We were all celebrating. But let's not forget how he got there. It was so much strategy
that
going
was
on.
there.
There was nothing going on in that race, just strategy. And I think it was a rainy race, right? Like
Yeah.
halfway.
I mean, you can never predict those races anyways. So.
Exactly. So he took his chance when he got it. At least finally. That's how it's. I'm a brutal Formula One analyzer. I have the
As you should be.
the most controversial takes on things, which I get battered for a lot. But I'm happy with it. So
I think that's the POV difference between a fan and a founder in the sport.
I think so. Like you look at it from a completely different lens. So if I was the team boss of any team that Hulkenberg had raced in, like I would be pissed. I would be pissed. If I were Vijay Mallya, I would have kicked him out if he, like in 2013.
Damn.
Like, see you, goodbye. Like, honestly, you just threw away a win. All you had to do is keep it on the black stuff.
Yeah.
That's it. And he was
Yeah.
being chased by, I think, Lewis that race or
Mhm.
Jensen or somebody.
Mhm.
But still, he's had his chances. In the Williams with a pole, he's had
His F3, F2 days were also promising, but yeah, couldn't translate.
and you'll see a lot of these.
As you said, that's the norm.
That's the norm.
That's the norm. You
Yeah.
choke is the norm. You
Yes.
succeed is the exception.
It really is. Because especially in Formula One, and I think in every top tier sport, not just racing, you have to be there at the right place, at the right time, with the right team.
There's only so much space at the top.
Yeah.
That's it. It's
Yeah.
just the
The
cream.
probability of winning is very, very, very low.
Seriously. Yeah. Imagine how many years of Formula One? 75? We've
Yeah.
had, what, 33, 34 champions?
That says something.
It says something, right? And yeah.
And how many of them who are so age-old are still on cricket?
Kind of. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
For taking time
for,
out.
yes, thoroughly
Especially-
enjoyed the conversation.
I hope it was good for your audience. I don't know if I overspoke, underspoke, not
We'll
sure.
figure that out.